Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. It is day 3 of the Republican convention, and once again, tons of both controversy as well as confusion. Running mate Mike Pence, he is speaking tonight, headlining this 10 o'clock hour, but instead of focusing on what Pence has to say, everyone's still talking about Melania Trump's speech. Let's get the very latest out of Cleveland with Marcy Gonzalez, who joins us now.
Well, Donald Trump and his running mate are now together here in Cleveland, where in just a few hours, Mike Pence will take the stage to formally accept his VP nomination. Donald Trump and Mike Pence holding a rally together for the first time since becoming the official GOP nominees.
Let's hear it for the next President of the United States of America, Donald Trump.
But today, some of the focus still on the speech given by Melania Trump on the convention's opening night. A Trump staff writer now apologizing for its similarities to Michelle Obama's 2008 convention speech.
You work hard for what you want in life.
That your word is your bond, that you do what you say you're going to do.
That your word is your bond, and you do what you say.
Meredith McIver writing in a statement that it was her mistake, saying Mrs. Trump read her some passages from Mrs. Obama's speech as examples of the messages she wanted to share. And, quote, I wrote them down and later included some of the phrasing in the draft that ultimately became the final speech. McIver saying she offered her resignation, but it was rejected. With more protests today in Cleveland, a different kind of tension inside day 3 of the Republican National Convention, as two of Trump's most attacked rivals, those he dubbed Lion Ted and Little Marco, address a party that's still trying to send a message of unity.
If we defend the Constitution, if we empower the people, then I promise you there are brighter days ahead for the United States of America.
And neither Ted Cruz nor Marco Rubio has endorsed Trump yet. It is still unclear whether that will happen here tonight. Live in Cleveland, Marcy Gonzalez, ABC News. Now back to you.
Thank you very much, Marcy. And let's bring in our panel right now. We've got Mike Morey. Mike's a managing director at SKD Knickerbocker. To his left, Dominic Carter, political journalist and author, of course. And Chris Shays joining us, former Republican congressman from Connecticut. Okay. I think we've all beaten to death here the Melania speech and everything else. But to me, more substantial or significant than just they lifted a passage and it got in is that we're still talking about it Wednesday because of them.
Because of them.
Now, again, some of this is inside baseball, and we always make mistakes when we sit around this table thinking everybody cares about this. But at my own peril, so what happened was, you had professional speechwriters, good speechwriters with good records that were brought on to help craft the speech. Then a person who's not a speechwriter, who's just a long-term aide of Trump, gets the draft and then reworks it. It gets out there. And within hours, everyone says, this sounds awful familiar. I don't have to go back to 1812 for this one. I have to go back to, 8 years ago. Oh my gosh, here it is. So they look at it. They have a chance to say, our bad, we made a mistake. They double down on it. Manafort does it. Melania Trump then says she wrote it herself. I still don't know why she did that. All right. And then they keep this going for 2 news cycles until finally we find out that somebody writes a letter where they offer to fall on the sword, which raised more questions for me, Mike, as to, I don't care if you're an alderman. Somebody looks at this. There's a software program where you can plug it in and see within seconds if somebody's going to say you lifted it from somebody else. There are so many unforced errors on this thing, it's hard to believe.
Yeah, well, so first, how unfortunate is it that Melania delivered a phenomenal speech. She was a great president. She's probably the best thing that's happened at this convention for him, but for the fact that this entire process got so screwed up. So you're absolutely right. One, what this indicates, though, is what a lot of people have been saying about Trump and his organization overall, and it should give you an indication of what it would be like if there was a Trump presidency. So the fact is you have speechwriters who know how to do this, who know how to vet their speeches, who know how to check their speeches to make sure there is no plagiarism. Then you have an entire campaign team that, as opposed to quickly coming out and acknowledging what was real, they were sort of denying that the sun was shining. They come out and said, in fact, that this is just random phrases that somehow made their way into her speech. You have an entire news cycle that took away the entire narrative from the first day, bled into the second day. They wait till the third day, and on the third day, they wind up having a staffer come out and give it another 24-hour. If I were them at this point, I would have just shut up.
Stop talking.
Stop talking now. Don't admit the mistake at this point. You decided that you were going to not admit a mistake. Now you admit a mistake. Not only do they admit the mistake and give it another 24 hours, but then they throw an even bigger problem, which was, as nice as it would be that her staff member said that she did it, she then goes on to say how both Melania and her admire Michelle Obama.
Right.
Now, here you are in a situation where Donald Trump has a problem with the base, and he's out there talking about how much she admires Michelle Obama. It's been a disaster, and it's really indicative of the total disaster that is the Trump operation, and should give the American people a lot of pause. If you cannot figure out how to deliver a speech in a 3-day convention, which is an infomercial, how are you possibly going to figure out how to run the country?
And maybe, Dom, we're too inside baseball, but for me there was something else, which is everybody knows somebody embarrasses your wife, intentionally or otherwise. Somebody expects you to do something. This guy's whole catchphrase was, "You're fired." That's what made him a household name to a lot of people with The Apprentice. So you got his former campaign manager, Lewandowski, telling everybody on CNN, somebody's head should roll for this. The head of the RNC says somebody ought to get canned for this. This happens, and Trump says, never mind, don't worry, nothing happened. I'm a little surprised there wasn't some penalty for somebody on how this whole thing went down.
I think we got the biggest insight from Donald Trump today himself about the way he sees the world via his Twitter account. When he said, and to understand this, you can understand the warped way that Donald Trump sees the world. When he tweeted, literally, Mike is right.
When he tweeted what? I got excited.
I'm going to tell you right now, but Mike is right. Let it go. You tried to let it go. Stop it. He issued 2 tweets today. The first one said his wife's speech has received more attention. Good or bad. Right. And so he was saying this as if this, but see, you got to understand the way that he thinks. And then he confirmed exactly what I knew what he was thinking in the next tweet, in which he said, there are some that believe all press is good press. And that, if to understand, he told you himself. And he has this John Wayne, macho, Ronald Reagan-esque type attitude of, I don't apologize. And so that's why, what you said, Richard, come on. A first-year journalism, political science student would agree with you on that. But not this guy, he's John Wayne.
Now, I want to play a clip from last night because obviously after day one was a debacle with the whole thing. They figured last night they'll turn the page. I thought, by and large, there was no terrible speeches, except there was a tone. And Chris, I want you to take a listen. Chris Christie, who everybody had fun with as to how the whole VP process worked and how emasculating that was to a certain degree. But nonetheless, he got up there, and his role was he was going to go out as prosecutor-in-chief. He was going to lay the case out against Hillary Clinton. But for some, the tone and the delivery went a little too far. Take a listen.
Tonight, as a former federal prosecutor, I welcome the opportunity to hold Hillary Rodham Clinton accountable for her performance and her character. Now,
the CG told you if you couldn't figure it out, it was locker up. Listen, I was watching it. I cringed a little because I was like, it sounds like a Salem witch trials, you know?
I cringed a lot. I wish that Christie had said, no, we're not going to lock her up. We're going to defeat her in the next election. That would have been legitimate. But when they started doing that, I felt it was like a mob. And I also was troubled by the fact that Christie it was like a mob trial. You know, in the end, let's lock her. No, they were like hang her. You know, where's the nearest tree? That's the feeling it was. And it was candidly, and you know, I'm an older white guy now, but it looked like a lot of older white guys and women yelling. I didn't see diversity.
Yeah.
I was embarrassed for my party that
well, there's apparently 2,500 people, delegates or whatever, and 70-something are people of color. But that brings me to my broader point, which is the goal of a convention, at least as I understood, is A, not to screw up, but B, you're trying to get a bump of 3 or 4 points, and you get to script it. Right. Nobody gets to ask you questions unless you want to answer them. And B, you pick who talks, you pick what they say, you pick the order they say it, and then the balloon drops and the confetti falls. Are they expanding their base?
Yeah, no. So that is the fundamental problem they're having this week is, so twofold. One, I think Christie could have done the prosecution up there quite much better than he did. In fact, it came off angry and nasty.
Right.
Whereas he could have done, he could have done
Like
it
Rudy the night
either
before, by
funny
the way,
or
yeah.
like Rudy as well, or he could have simply said with a very straight face, like lay out the facts, not like an angry, foaming sort of radical, but like lay out the facts. That could have been effective. But to your larger point. So this is the first opportunity that most of the public is actually tuning in. The folks are really starting to say, Americans are now starting to say, like, let me make some decisions, let me learn a bit more about these candidates. The entire objective of a convention is to actually expand, to try to bring in independents, expand to Democrats. There should be some bipartisan messages coming out of that convention.
That hasn't happened in the last few conventions. Even under Bush, he didn't. I mean, he didn't want to appeal to environmentalists. He didn't want to appeal to.
The difference was Bush, though. The demographics are a little different now. Bush's entire campaign strategy was drill down to the base, rile up the base. Donald Trump already has a problem with the base to some degree. But this isn't a base. The Republican Party can't do a base election anymore. Yeah. The Democratic Party can still do it. But, Hillary's a fairly flawed candidate because she's got such high negatives. But they should have. Donald Trump should have been making, his entire operation should have been making arguments to independents. They should have been sort of giving an impression of criticism, but not equating her to Lucifer.
And that literally happened. He's not joking. Ben Carson went up there, talked about a term paper that Hillary wrote while in college on somebody who if you go through the 6 degrees of separation here, had once sourced Lucifer or something. So basically he said that Hillary was a devil worshiper. Okay, but yes, you can't make it up.
You can do attacks at a convention. Look at how Ann Richards used to do it. She did it with a twinkle in her eyes. She did it with humor. There are ways to sort of drive that home, but without being like, I mean, if you just ran Rudy and then you ran Carson and then you ran Chris Christie, oh my God, children would be frightened watching that.
I'll tell you one thing, the Trump kids, they've done better, and the Trump family. I didn't know what to expect. They've done better than some of this quote-unquote pros. All right, so the question is the GOP in disarray and filled with disunity, or are they starting to come together? Well, today, Andrew, who we're going to talk to in a minute, caught up with, among other people, New York Congressman Peter King, who once called Donald a, quote, feckless pretender. So the question is a guy like Peter King coming around to the Donald? We'll ask him that coming up next.